This triggers me to no end, and as soon as I see it in session or sense it, I know that I need to set a boundary. Yes, there is a role play in this video because I know you all love those, and the reason that setting boundaries is so important is because they can be tricky. When we are in session going through the motion, a lot of times the triggers are popping up and we don't recognize them until they're way too late, and then we're left with these icky feelings after session and we don't really realize why and where they're coming from. A lot of times it's because our boundaries have been crossed. So recognizing when your boundaries crossed is one of my main tips. So let's pause the video real quick and get real tangible and list those out. Just one, if you can put it in the comment box below. What exactly are those triggers? What are the things that we get on soapboxes about, the things that really hit us hard? These are the things that may actually lead you to become overly critical or overly sensitive when these topics come up. We can't help but want to share advice or even share our own personal story. One of the major boundaries to set with clients is your emotional boundaries. So as you're in session, it's really important to remember that you are separate from the client. If you are an empath like myself, then this can get a little bit tricky. We can really meet the client where they are and feel those emotions for ourselves and sometimes take those home with us. This is called countertransference and transference. This dance, this balance, it's that dynamic that happens between client and therapist when they're transferring some issues upon you, and you sitting in the seat across from them are unable to recognize exactly what's going on, so you start reacting to their initial reactions. That countertransference transference dance is a little bit tricky, and it does let us know exactly where our triggers lie. So this list may look familiar. If you had trouble coming up with triggers, these are actually signs of countertransference. So I mentioned that lying is one of my triggers, and now I want to take you into a role play of what I would say if I were triggered in a session. So if we're sharing things that are not truthful in here, then all this time that we're spent together is really not going to benefit you in the long run. The advice that I'm giving, the feedback that I'm giving, everything that's happening in here is going to be based off of lies, meaning you're not going to be able to take anything with you beyond this session that's going to be helpful at all in your day-to-day life in dealing what you got to deal with. So the time in here is yours. Then comes the follow through. You need to be able to follow through. If you've already set the boundary and let them know this is not okay, and the client continues to cross those boundaries, we need to be able to remove ourselves from the situation. It's okay to end a session early. This is important because clients will test our limits and those boundaries that we're setting. If you work in a school like myself or with children and adolescents, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If we don't follow through with the boundaries that we set, then they will assume that those boundaries don't apply to them, which is a dynamic that we don't want to have repeating itself in session. I think that's something that therapists and social workers and helpers and healers like us really fear, is severing somehow the rapport that's being built. That is not what we need to focus on. We need to focus not on ourselves, but on the client. So helping them process through those maybe feelings of shock, and use those situations as teachable moments for our clients. Once we're done with session, I do a little bit of a cleansing. I balance myself. I practice mindfulness, like a mindful moment, to make sure that I'm separating myself from the dynamic that just happened in session. Many times when our boundaries are being crossed in session, we don't realize how and when that's happening. So it's important to step back and rebalance and refocus after every session if possible. This can also be a way to get into the routine of documenting, which is something that's still tough for me, but I do make sure to balance myself, and then I'm starting to incorporate documentation in there so everything gets done all at once, and then I'm able to really refocus on my next client or to move on to my next task of the day. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I have another video. If you're thinking now of those tough clients and how to respond, there's a whole video on that as well up on my channel. It's up here, a little bit older, but still some really good feedback in there of how I go ahead and manage those very difficult and hard to reach clients.